Okay, to get started, we'll just kick off this video here, and we will get introduction to Firebase.
Developing a successful app isn't easy. To reach a broad audience, you'll need to consider your iOS, Android, and mobile web users. And to build for these platforms, you'll need a backend server to store data and support the apps. Of course, you want to get your users logged in, hopefully lots of users, which means your backend will have to scale. And then after you've solved your scaling problems, you have to find more ways to spread the word to get you users. But have you found a way to measure all this activity? And, oh no, your app is crashing and causing servers to melt down, and you haven't even made a dime yet. Don't you wish this could be easier? This is why we built Firebase. It has all the tools you need to build a successful app. It helps you reach new users, keep them engaged, scale up to meet that demand, in addition to getting paid. So let Firebase handle the details of your app's backend infrastructure, user engagement, and monetization, while you spend more time building the apps your users will love. To manage and monitor your apps connected to Firebase, there's a web console to view crashes, set up experiments, track analytics, and a whole lot more.
Cool. Excellent. Right. Okay, so let's introduce what Firebase is. Firebase is known as a backend as a service, right? That means you basically tapping into an existing backend and you using that infrastructure to create your backend for your app. You're not working with the backend from scratch, meaning you're not coding the entire backend from scratch, but you're using Firebase's infrastructure to be the backend of your app or your web app, as in the video, or your Android app, right? So today we'll be introducing Firebase, authentication, and Firebase, signing up to Firebase and setting up and configuring our authentication for Firebase. When I say authentication, what I'm saying is my user needs to be logged into my account or needs to log into my app in order to use my app, for example. So today what we'll be doing is using the simple startup project we have as a login infrastructure to our app. And the big objective of the day is, can we sign in users to our backend, to our Firebase, right? That's the objective. Can I create a Firebase console application? Can I connect my Xcode project to my Firebase backend? And can I use my login view to sign in a user? To sign in a user that's existing or to create a new user, right? So that's the objective of the day. We'll take Firebase piece by piece here. The first day today is all about configuring our project, setting up our project, and logging in a user to our backend service, okay? And next week, we'll talk about other infrastructures on Firebase. The big infrastructures we'll be talking about in Firebase is authentication, right, which is today, database, which we'll talk about next week, and also storage, right? So database is, I have, for example, a game I'm creating. Firebase will have the game data. Firebase is gonna house the game data for my application, right? David is there. David is working on a restaurant app or a coupon app. If he's using Firebase for it, Firebase would hold all that data for that app, right? So before that, we've been using other backends, or not backends, but other APIs, for example, Foursquare API. But basically, Firebase here, we could make our own Foursquare-like app that has our own, whether it be community restaurants or family restaurants, or Adan had an idea of making a deli app of bodegas, right? So there's nothing that exists, but with Firebase, you could make that exist. That's an offline question. Cool. Right. So Firebase again is a backend as a service, right? Or BaaS, backend as a service.
So you mentioned authentication, storage, and what else?
So we said there's 3 components we'll be covering in class. One is authentication today. 2 is database, right? So I create a piece of data. Where does that live? It lives in the database, the Firebase database. And 3rd, I want to go ahead and save an image. Where do I save that image, that physical image? Where do I save it? I save it in storage. Or a video. I save that video in storage, right? Any questions so far? At this point, we know Firebase is a backend as a service product, right? And when we say backend, backend is the power behind our app. We create an app, it has a UI, I click a button, I want to save an item, I go ahead to save that item on Firebase database, okay? I want to log in my user, how does that authentication work? Who takes care of that authentication? Firebase takes care of that authentication for me. I'm not dealing with user passwords, I'm not figuring out who's encrypting those user passwords. Firebase is handling the encryption of those passwords for me, right? Cool. Same as the storage, where am I saving that photo? Firebase, that's where I'm saving the photo. And there's different price tiers on Firebase. There's quotas, I think the storage quota is 5 gigs of storage you could save. And after that, you have to start paying for it. But it gives us a lot to get started. Capstone projects all use Firebase as far as like infrastructure backends there. As iOS developers, we have Firebase, and which is great because you don't have to go learn backend development from scratch, right? You just have to learn the Firebase infrastructure, how to save data on Firebase, how to retrieve data from Firebase, and that is your backend there, right? So at the end of the day, you're the one designing your app from front-end UI to back-end data. Does that make sense? Cool. Great. Okay, so we all have Google accounts. Let's get started by creating a Firebase console project. So we all have Google accounts. Let us go and type in Firebase. Actually, just type in console.firebase.google. And I'll slug this link out. Okay. On my current console, I have many projects. On your console, if you haven't used Firebase yet, you won't have any projects, correct? Okay. Whenever you get to that page, the console page. Okay, at this point, do we see Create Project button? Yes. So click on the Create Project button. I'll click on my Add Project here. We all see that page 1 of 3, Create a Project. Do we all see? I really need feedback here because I cannot continue without feedback. Okay, so we see Create a Project. We'll go ahead and we'll give it a name. We'll call it Firebase Demo. I click Continue. Google Analytics is very helpful here, so we'll keep it enabled. Google Analytics tells you everything about per page. It could give you information about per page, how many times a user click a certain button. There's a lot of information there as an app developer that you could grab from that Google Analytics page there. So keep that enabled. It's enabled by default. We'll continue to step 3. Select an account. In my case, I'll just say default account for Firebase here, which is fine. And do we all see a Create Project button? Yes? Oh, you got to that step. I think I got to create a project. I think you got to. Okay, at this point, click on Create Project. If it asks you for any agreements, just select yes for those agreements. So it creates the project. At the end of the day, that project we create in here on Firebase, we need to connect that project with our Xcode project, right? That way, any change we do on Xcode or that app, it propagates to Firebase, okay?
It doesn't matter what name you use.
No, it doesn't matter. The names doesn't matter. What's going to matter is a plist that we'll create very soon, and that plist connects your Firebase account to the app or to your project, okay? Moving on, we click on continue. At this point, we get into our console for the project, our dashboard, right? Do we all see our dashboard here? So as I said before, the big items we'll be covering in our Firebase unit is authentication here. We see authentication in the left column. Yes? Database and storage, right? You guys see it? Okay, cool. So those are the three big things. Authentication we'll cover today. Can I create a user, right? Other things you could do in authentication, can I delete a user account, right? There's a lot of things we could do in authentication, but the objective of the day is to smoothly transition into Firebase, right? As seamless as possible. We don't want to delve too far in. So authentication is what we'll be covering today. And come Monday, we'll start talking about database, like how can I create items in my database? How can I retrieve those items? How can I modify those items? So the database there is the data part of Firebase, right? And storage is where do I store my media? Because you can't store media in the database. The media you store has to be in storage, okay? When I say media, sound, movie, whatever it is, images, right? MP3 files, whatever it is there, that goes into storage. As you get into your capstone projects, you might want to look at MLKit here, which is machine learning. Awesome. So at this point, we now need to go create a platform-specific app. There's iOS, there's Android. We're dealing with iOS. So we'll click on the iOS button. Do we all see the iOS button here? Where it says get started by adding Firebase to your app. Yes? Yeah. Okay. So that same project could power an Android app. It could power an iOS app running the same Firebase project. So the same backend, we'll be talking to those multiple platforms or web, doesn't really matter. So I could have web, iOS, Android talking to that same Firebase backend, which makes sense, right? Because you don't have a separate backend for each app you build in. So I'll click on iOS. That takes us into adding Firebase to our project, right? Yesterday we got introduced to CocoaPods. It feels like longer, right? Only yesterday. Yesterday we got introduced to CocoaPods, so today we'll be using CocoaPods. But before we go ahead and use CocoaPods here, we need to get the bundle ID for our application. And that bundle ID, you want to get that bundle ID from your Xcode project, okay? So we'll go over to our Xcode project. We'll go over to our Xcode project. We'll click on the top project here where it says Firebase Demo. Do we all see General here? Do we see General? Do we see where it says Bundle Identifier? Go ahead and change your bundle identifier to your name. Not like it matters, but I think you'd rather have your name there than Alex Paul on your Firebase Demo project. The project is in Slack. So go ahead, change your bundle ID, run the app again, make sure it still works, and copy the bundle ID. Yeah, you copy the entire bundle ID.
No, but should we leave it, like you said?
It could start com, it could start org, it could start, reverse domain, that's what's recommended when you create a bundle identifier. Reverse domain is, for example, if your website is pursuit.org, you would have org.pursuit.firebase-demo. And that bundle ID follows that app until you push it to the App Store, right? And if you're dealing with push notifications and stuff like that, the bundle ID comes in very, very important because that same bundle ID that Firebase has needs to be in that Xcode project, needs to be everywhere you're trying to do that push notification. So copy the bundle ID and go back to your Firebase console. where it has iOS bundle ID, paste it in. It's going to ask you for app nickname, we don't need that. The App Store ID, that's when you're pushing an app to the App Store. That's where you'll have an ID specific to your app. We're not doing App Store push right now, so that doesn't matter. And at this point, we'll click on Register App. Please confirm that you could run the app before you paste in the bundle ID, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Click on Register App. So at this point, it's registered the app and it's created what's known as a Google Service info plist file. We're familiar with plist files. They're property list files. They're basically a stored dictionary with key value pairs. In our case here, that Google info plist becomes very, very important. That's the way Firebase knows what app am I talking to, right? I have the bundle ID, I have the app ID, I know what app I'm talking to. So when I have the user log in, it goes to the correct Firebase account, right? So here it tells us we need to go ahead and click next here. Well, first we need to download the Google plist. So click on the download button here. Click on download. If you already, like I do here, in the future, if you already have a Google plist file, you need to remove, like in my case, I have a parent one here. Do we see that? Because one existed already. Simply, you could just rename it to only be Google service.info, right? Because if it's a Google info parent, it's not going to work. Yes, go ahead.
So I've got an error when I'm trying to register my app.
What's the error say?
Unexpected error as a group.
Is that a server error? Like refresh the browser?
Requested identity where you exist.
Did you change, let's see. Anybody else getting an unknown error here? Were you able to get your list? Yeah, I was down.
So if it doesn't immediately pop up, just like command space, look up your downloads, go into your downloads folder, and it should be in your downloads folder.
I'm gonna give myself a timeline to figure out what I'm trying to figure out. We already have suggestions for the details here.
And not working is so unfortunate because my parents are around the age of
I'm still curious for a second. Having a unknown error saying the entity has been created before. What? Okay. Were we all able to get to the point where it says download Google plist info?
Yeah.
Right? Google service info. So I'll save it to my downloads here. I'll just replace this. That's fine. Okay, cool. So at this point, I'll click next here. And we'll stop here for now. We'll do some work before we come back here to this page. Let's go over to our Xcode project. I'm in my Xcode project, and we will now add the Google plist file somewhere here. Okay, we'll add it like right above the info plist. Do we all see where my info plist is? Okay. I'll right click on info plist. I'll say add files to Firebase. Actually, wait, don't add yet. I'll remove it. You fast with adding, huh? Don't add yet. I want us to, since our app will be public on GitHub, I want us to go ahead and add the Google info plist as a gitignore file. Everybody with me? So if you've added it already, just remove it, because right now there's no Git history yet. Just delete it. Cool? You did? Good. And make sure your app still runs correctly. All right, so at this point, let's push our app to GitHub. Make sure there's no Google info plist. Everybody? Everybody? Okay. Let's go to source control. Source control, create a Git repository. Create. Go to our source editor here. Source control, create Git repository, like we did. Go to source control project here and push or create Firebase remote. And here we will give it a name. This is fine, public is fine. And here I'll simply say, intro. I'm sorry? How did I do?
Before the step.
Wait. How did I do?
Right click. Just right click on.
Right click on your source project, create Firebase remote. Okay, here, introduction to Firebase. In this app, we will cover authentication, database, and storage. Okay, public, Firebase, all that is good. At this point, I'll click on create. And I'll go over to GitHub. So here I have my Firebase demo with all my projects in there, all my files. And now I need to add a gitignore here. So we'll go create a new file. We'll search, or we'll edit gitignore. We'll find the template that says Swift.
Oh, we had to put the period.
Yes, definitely. We'll scroll all the way down. We'll add the usual suspects here. Our DS store. Let me zoom in here. DS store. And new, we'll have our Google service info.plist. And let's verify the name is spelled correctly here. So if we go back to our folder, well, I keep trying to go back to the folder. If I go to my Finder and I go to my downloads, to make this easier, we could look for the Google plist here and basically get the name, copy the name, and go back to our project or here and paste it in. Okay. So Google service dash info uppercase I info.plist. No. No, there's no slash before it.
Because it's not a Swift file.
It's not a folder. Oh, wait a minute, Swift file.
Oh, okay, so you only do it in front of fold.
Yeah.
And whatever's in the fold.
Exactly. Like if we had a secrets folder, we would have done this, right? We would have done secrets and anything inside the secrets, right? But if you have a config that's Swift, for example, you just say config that's Swift, yes?
Oh, it's just the file.
Yeah.
See, I remember I wasn't here for this, so I was trying to like catch up on
Don't be good. You want me to say watching videos and stuff, right? Just want me to say that.
No, I was right on the person.
Okay, cool. Good. All right. Other things you could do at some point here in our Google, in our getignore, it pushes the pods as well. Like here, the pods, since we know what pods are, it will include the pods on my GitHub. If for some reason you don't want to include the pods in your project, you would simply remove that comment here and say, go ahead and ignore my pods. Okay? That could come up in capstone projects or your own projects, whatever. Basically, anything you want to ignore, that's where you do it. But here it tells you we recommend against adding pods directory to your getignore. However, it's up to you to judge here. There's pros and cons, obviously, with adding it or not adding it. If you want to send your project to an employer, please add the pods. But if the pods are too big or whatever, you don't have to add them or you don't add them, right? Yes?
We have the pods in the project now.
There's no pods in the project right now.
So then how can you add the pods?
I'm just saying in the future. Like even today, we'll have pods in our project, but there's no pods right now.
They give you examples.
They give you a template of what. Yeah. And that one is not even ignoring it. It has a comment on there.
Oh, okay.
So if you ignore pods, like let's say for example, if the pod's too big, if someone downloads the project, they can still do a pod install.
Pod install, exactly. You give them instructions, hey, go ahead, run pod install. Even on your own app, as you build your apps and whatever small apps, big apps, employers are watching them. So if they need to do pod install, say instructions for installing the app, run pod install. There might be pods where you have specific versions or whatever like that. Like put as many instructions in that README as possible. That way it's like an ease of use for that person. Great. So now we have our DS store, we have our Google Service info plist. We will go ahead and commit that file. We'll commit the file, we have our getignore. Great. And now let's go back to our Xcode project. And let us go to source control and pull. I should really be going to terminal here, just to verify. Let's go to terminal for a second. Go to terminal. Navigate over to your project. Go to terminal, navigate over to your Firebase demo project. And do an ls-a. Verify that you have a getignore. Open your getignore. And verify at the bottom, you do have your Google service info plist. Let me zoom in here.
So we need to pull first, right?
Yeah, pull first, definitely. Because we did that change on our GitHub repo. So you want to pull first locally before you do any add-in.
Wait, when you do ls-a, what is that?
It shows the hidden files.
Oh, so ls will just show right away.
Yeah.
ls-a.
We'll show the hidden files, like all the dots there.
I don't have a,
Yeah, mine doesn't have either.
Did you guys pull?
no, but I can pull on to,
I like how you guys like just teach each other. It's awesome. Yes, you guys have to pull.
in the project.
Yes.
Oh, I can't believe it because you said go to. No. This man is something else.
We all verified we have our Google Service plist and our getignore.
Yes.
And we always pull when we have a change on the server, yes? Okay.
I thought you were gonna pull internal of that, so I can't get internal.
Oh, I pulled before I got here. All right, cool. Great. Are you guys sitting together? I'm gonna break you guys apart. Yeah. Yeah. All right, cool. Awesome. Let us now go back to our Xcode project and add our Google info plist. What do we say right here? So now click on your info plist. Let me zoom in here. Right click on your info plist. Go down to add files. Click on add files. And navigate over to where you saved it. In my case, mine is in downloads. I click on Google. Please make sure this is checked here. Copy items if needed. Make sure that's checked. Make sure the target says Firebase demo. And make sure destination says copy items if needed. And click on Google service and go ahead and add it. Great. I'm sorry? No, just the project, not the test for now. Okay, we all included our Google Service info plist to our project, correct? Okay, great. Let's now go back to our instructions.
I have a question.
Yes.
You don't have a regular storyboard in here, right?
We'll get to the app soon. We don't have a regular storyboard there, no. All right, next step, we downloaded the configuration file, the Google plist file. We included it into our project. Next step, we need to go ahead and do a pod in it. And in our pod file, we need to include, for now, Firebase Analytics and run pod install. So very similar to what we did yesterday with introduction to CocoaPods. We'll run pod in it. Pod in it initializes a CocoaPods project in my folder. I'll include the dependency here that I want. And I'll go ahead and run pod install. When I run pod install, what gets created when I run pod install? The what? The file, yes, the file. But there's the file, there's Xe workspace, right? That's the big one that gets created. That Xe workspace will now house our pods and our project, right? So let's go ahead and do so. The one thing we need to copy, go ahead and copy this line here where it says pod, Firebase Analytics, include the quotes here. Copy that. So copy the line that says pod, single quote, Firebase / analytics, closing quote. And let's go to our terminal. In my terminal, I'm in my project, right? So if I do a ls, I have a Firebase demo project. I have a Firebase demo Xcode proj, which is what we open up to edit our Xcode project files. And we have a Firebase demo test, right? So at this point, if I want to initialize a CocoaPods, what do I type in? Pod in it. And I press enter. And if I do an ls again, I now have a pod file, right? I now have a pod file. That pod file is, that's the file I edit to add dependencies to, right? Remember, dependencies is the reason why we use CocoaPods or Swift Package Manager, right? So without adding dependencies there, there's no reason to use CocoaPods, right? So now we'll go ahead and open the pod file. We type in open, pod file, and press enter. Yes? You were here yesterday, correct? You watched the video and you downloaded the project. You did both of those things, so you're right on par. And 2 days ago, you downloaded CocoaPods. You have CocoaPods. Okay. If you do pod init, what happens? If you do pod, what happens? You don't have CocoaPods installed. Aaron, double check Chelsea's computer there. Run CocoaPods on it. Sudo gem install CocoaPods. Okay, so let's edit. So we edit right where it says pods for Firebase demo. We'll put a new line there, and we'll simply type in pod. Well, we copied it, right? So we could just paste it in. So that one line, that's what we should have, pod. Let me kind of format there correctly, not like it matters there. So we have pod, Firebase Analytics. We press save or Command S. Command S, Command Q to quit, Command S to save, Command Q to quit. What's the command we run now? To pod install, right? So now we run pod install to install those dependencies. Pod install. Oh, internet is flying today. Oh, the early bird. Next time I'll just hide the screen when I do it. All right, how we doing? Is it downloading? Still downloading? Finished? Initializing Firebase.
I mean, sorry, installing Firebase, Analytics.
Yeah.
Analytics. I'm one more.
Yeah, making up for waiting.
I think it's
You almost like I'm just not using it. We're like writing for extreme measures. I like karaoke. I've wept Kelby when he was so fun. I did some singing. And then I would do class karaoke if we were together. Go watch.
Did you how's this installing? 2 seconds? Look at that smile.
I'm not smiling, I'm like extra, I'm in shock that he's doing this with me. What y'all doing?
I would also say that
How you doing?
trying to sing
Done?
probably be karaoke.
Yulia, yours is close?
Probably, but he won't.
Yeah. I blame you. How many people still downloading? Oh, we all done? Oh, great. How you doing? Done? Awesome. This is good. Okay, so let's go back to our console here. So we did pod init, we installed analytics. Oh, and we did pod install. What's the next step here? Remember, we have to now close Xcode. And what file are we opening from now on? XC Workspace. Very good. So let's go do that. I'll just close my Xcode. Close my Xcode. File, open. Navigate to my project. Firebase demo. Zoom in here. And those are the files I'm files and projects we have or folders we have.
Before we close Xcode, is it normal for there to be errors?
In the project,
Yeah.
there were no errors there.
Mine is saying directory not found for option -F user.
Close it and open it back. I mean, open it to the XP workspace. We'll see if there's still errors. So navigate to your project. Do we all see XP workspace at this point?
Yes.
Double click on it. Now, yeah, double click on it. Double click on it. And let's focus on the right navigation column here, or the left navigation column, sorry. Now we have two projects. We have a Firebase project, which we initially had, and we have a pods project, right? That's why it's now part of the XC workspace, right? Now there's multiple projects managed by the XC workspace. If we open up the pods folder, those are all the library files we downloaded or we installed via CocoaPods, right? A lot of dependencies there.
That's what we did just now with the Google.
Yeah, with the Google. Yes. With the Google and the Apple, yes. Sure. Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, pretty soon it's going to be out of hand. Okay, so we have our pod file. We see that we did edit the Firebase analytics. Great. Let's keep going. Back into our console, we click next. And now we need to do some Firebase code configuration in our app delegate, right? Firebase still uses the app delegate there for configuration. That document is not updated for iOS 13 as we see. What's the difference there? What's if you were asked this question, like what's off with this particular app delegate code as opposed to what we see in iOS 13? We're not using delegate and window. Window does not belong there. Window belongs in the sin delegate. Very good. So some intern needs to update this really quickly, really soon. Cool. So let's go to what we need to do in our app delegate. Import Firebase. And we need to go ahead and configure the Firebase app. Right? That point there starts talking to the server. Like, hey, I know there's a Firebase project. I'm communicating with the Firebase project with this simple configure function. So let's go to our...
Those things next to it is just when you tap it and copies it?
Yes. But we'll...
That's all you need really from this config.
Exactly. But we will just type it out. Let's go to our app delegate, which is in supporting files. Click on app delegate. Let me make this bigger. Okay, this is better. So we're going to import right below UIKit. What are we importing? Firebase. Luba, does yours recognize Firebase? I know like an expert sometimes plays around. Does it see it? And next, what's the next line we're doing here? We're saying Firebase app, right? Dot configure. Yes?
No, it doesn't.
Mine neither.
It did, but no, it doesn't.
It says no such model file.
Make sure you have XC Workspace open, correct? Close Xcode, reopen it if it doesn't recognize it right away. So the two things we did, we added, let's just put steps there, I guess. One, import, well, doesn't really matter. Firebase, add in Firebase, or configure in Firebase. Step 1 and step 2. Cool? So we imported Firebase and we configured the app. Let's go back to our console. Let's click next here.
Okay, mine is the same way it's working.
Okay, so we click next. Right now it's trying to communicate with the app to see if everything went well. Some of you guys may have seen a green banner already saying successful. If not, it says to delete the app and run again. So let's go to the app. I'll run my app. Right now, it's trying to communicate between the app and Firebase servers to see if there's a connection there, meaning if you've configured correctly. It may take longer than normal if we're all on the network here.
Does it have to be running for this test to pass?
At least once or at some point, yes.
Oh, wait, what happened to yours?
Just run the app. Ignore the module part there. Let me go back to my console. I will delete the app, which was recommended here. I'll go to my simulator. I'll delete the app.
We should all do delete that.
Yeah, delete the app, run it again. And at that point, it says, congratulations. I was able to connect my Xcode app to my Firebase backend. Your heart skips a bit? Is that? It's okay. There was no data there. Cool. So at this point, we have successfully added Firebase to our app. If it's still spinning, delete the app and run it again.
The same time it's fine,
Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead.
Can you give like 2 minutes just to get to that? I want it to succeed. So it's, no, it's not really good now.
So access to the app.
But does it automatically say congratulations or say it automatically? When I press next?
Okay, cool. We'll take a short 5-minute break and we'll come back. If anybody needs help, I'll float around here. Okay, so we've added Firebase to our project. We confirmed that we were connected to Firebase here with our banner. We got our banner. At that point, we clicked on Continue to Console, and now it takes us back to our console page for our first step in development here with Firebase, right? So we said we will walk through today authentication. We'll start authentication today so a user could log into our app and create an account or log into our app with an existing account. This is the objective of the day, the morning. Once we get to that objective, that'll be pretty much it for the lesson, and we'll come back on Monday to go further into our app. Okay? So authentication is the next step we introduce in here. If you're introducing authentication, you have to add authentication to the pod as well. For database, as we go to different services, we have to add those services in our pod file. We're not going to add everything at once, right? We'll add them as we go, as we need them. First, we'll add authentication in our pod file. So let's go to our pod file in Xcode. Open up my pods folder. I open up my pods folder, and the first file I see is my pod file. I click on my pod file. I click on my pod file. I get access to my pod file. And now we want to add in authentication. So right after our pod Firebase Analytics, we'll say pod Firebase auth for authentication. And later into next week, we will also add, we'll add later pod Firebase database or Firestore. And we'll also add pod storage. That might be a uppercase S. I think lowercase s is fine. But for now, all we add in is Firebase Authentication. When you've edited your pod file, go over to terminal and run pod install again.
In terminal do pod install again?
Yeah.
It doesn't install the authorization,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, authentication.
authentication. Yeah. That's fast.
Cool. So let's go to terminal. Make sure that you're in the project and run pod install. Right. And at this point, it installed Firebase Authentication 643. We go back to our project, and we have authentication now. We can continue on. Let's go to the controllers part of our app. I'll close the pods folder. I don't need that. Yes, go ahead. What's your question? Make sure all those are spelled correctly there. Let me see your port file. Yes. Okay, so let's go to the login view controller. Actually, we have to create a new file, but that's fine. Run the app for now. Make sure our app still runs correctly. So this is our app. It's a login page. This is where we'll be spending our time today. The user enters the email. User enters the email and password. And this page assumes that the user is logging in, right? They have an account already, right? There's two states in our Firebase authentication. One, if I have an account already, I want to log in with that credential. Next, if I do not have an account, the user will click on the sign up here. This is like any other login page, right? If I don't have an account, the user clicks on sign up. And at that point, I'll put in an email and a password, and I click on the sign up button, and that gets me a new account, right? So there's two states we aiming for today. So let's go ahead and create a folder or a new group. We'll create a new group. Let's create a new group here. We'll call it Firebase Services. Firebase Services. That folder will basically hold authentication service or session, whatever we call it. It will hold database session, and it will hold storage session. Those are the three things we aiming for here. So we have a Firebase service. In the Firebase service, I'll create a file. It's a Swift file. The name of the file, we'll call it Authentication Session. We created a new folder called Firebase Services. Authentication Session. And we click create. And again, we created a folder for it because we'll have other sessions later in next week. We'll have database and we'll have storage as well. Import foundation. We'll start off with a class here. We'll call it Authentication Session. We'll import. What are we importing here? Firebase Auth. Over the weekend, start looking over the Firebase documentation. It is one of the best documentations a developer could ever ask for. Let's see real quickly here. I could simply type in Firebase Authentication and take a look at Firebase Authentication. Let me slack this out.
So if I didn't see Firebase,
You installed it via pods, right? You installed it via pods?
no, I mean, both Firebase off. I need to do it.
Okay, this is what I want here. Slack this out. So over the weekend, as you have time, please start reading over the Firebase documentation. It's one of the best documentations out there as far as like getting started or going advanced, right? It's very easy to read and test out. Firebase authentication, this is what we're dealing with here. I just slacked it out. I'm sorry? Yeah, definitely. What are we dealing with? We're dealing with managing users. You could get a user's profile. So the minute a user logs in, you could get their profile, like the email they signed in with, the UID of the user, a photo URL, the user has a URL, a photo they added. Okay. The functions we after today, let me zoom in a bit more here. More. The functions we after today, or right now, is off. I want to create a new user. This is the function I have from Firebase. I give it an email, a password, and I get back a completion handler with an object called off result. The off result is that data object that gives us the user object with the email or the photo URL, whatever they're after. So this is signing up a new user. So we're creating signing up a new user, and we're creating signing up an existing user. Those are the two functions we'll add in our authentication session class right now, okay? So we'll go over to Xcode. We have Firebase off. Julia, did that work for you now? Do you have Firebase off? Awesome. So we'll write some functions here. Write a public function, say create new user, and we'll have a next one called sign existing user. So create new user expects an email, so we pass it an email. Is a string and a password, also a string. And again, the password encryption is handled by Firebase. We as iOS developers, we are not the ones handling the password encryption, okay? We hand it off to Firebase. Firebase does the encryption of the password, and you cannot view some. Okay, so we're talking about password encryption. We're not the ones handling encryption of passwords, right? Firebase is the one handling that for us, okay? We just hand off the text fields, and the backend takes care of the encryption part of it, okay? Ahad, did you have a question about that earlier? Okay. Please feel free to ask questions here. So we have email, we have password, great. Let's go ahead and write our function. So we say auth create user. What do we have here? Auth dot create user if email.
This is so.
You okay?
Okay.
Password and completion handler of data result. An error. Okay. We'll have a completion handler there as well. Completion. Is going to be a result type. If an error occurred, result type, we have our off data result or we have an error.
How come we don't use app ever anymore?
We could write enum for it, but
It would
that's,
be different because it's not.
yeah, it's just, there's days where we have the time to do, write an enum for it. But at this point, if we know, right, we could write our own enum to handle our own Firebase errors. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, cool. So here we have a data result or an error. So if let error equal to error, else if let off data result equal to off data result. If we do have an error, we'll just capture it in a completion handler. Here we have a failure, we just pass the error. And here we have a success case. We capture our off data result. So this is creating a new user, brand new user. This function gets called. This function is very similar to what we had before. We'll just type it out anyway, it doesn't matter. Get practice here. So email, string, password, string. We have our completion, at escape enclosure, our result type, returning void. Result type here, same as we had before. We have an off data result or error. You could copy paste it, I heard that. As long as we understand what's happening, right?
You're not doing the auth.create.
Yeah, we'll call it. Actually, I did not call it yet. You see, so you're ahead of me with copy paste.
No, I didn't actually. I didn't, I'm just
Sign up, right? Sign in, sorry. Sign in anonymously. There's a lot of sign-ins here, sign in with token. There's a lot there. That's what I'm saying, like start looking at the docs to see what's possible. So sign in with email and password. Where am I? Email, sign in, email, password. This one, right? Sign in, email, password. Great. So sign in with email and password. I put in my email. I put in my password of data result. Error. And yes, it's the same thing, so you could just go ahead and copy this, paste it here. So those are the two methods we'll be using today. Sign in, sign existing user, and create a new user. And when we do that, does that user appear on our Firebase console? Okay, cool. We good? Good? Perfect. 1 second, sure. Okay, okay. I'm here.
And so is Luba in her place. She recycled that music.
Well, not only that, because the thing that are differences, Alex, it never wants to.
The what?
Does it still stay?
Where?
Does it stay running? Yeah, stop that. And then like build it sometime.
It's the same thing. It's just calling different parts of the back end on Firebase. Both of them expected email password. Both of them will throw an error.
The difference between user and sign in.
Yes. How are we doing? We good? Continue? Christian, what's that? Continue? Yes? Okay, cool. So back in our login view controller, let's just walk through the code, what's happening here. So we have an enum account state. As the user is toggling between our app here, that state changes. So if I click on login, it changes the state here. We started for default state of being existing. If I rerun the app, we'll see why. Exactly. So when we run the app, it's a login page. It assumes existing user. If I click on sign up, it transitions, and now it's in a new user mode. Does that make sense? So we have an enum to capture that. And feel free to change the animation if you want. You could just look at the animation block here. Right now, you're just using a cross dissolve, but you could feel free to change the animation, whatever animation you want in that block of code here. And here is where the user clicks on the toggle button. It comes here, it changes the state, change the account state, right? So if it was previously existing, it's now a new user, vice versa. And then it does the animation, and it also changes the text, right? So that's just some UI updates there. Cool. So at this point, we have our animation working. Now we need to capture what the user enters. So when the user enters some text here, the user enters some password here, and they're pressing sign up, we want to be able to take those values and pass it over to our functions to call Firebase to set up our account. Okay? So let's go to our login button. Do we have a login button? We have a login button pressed here. Is it connected? Xcode always throws me off here. Let's put a print statement in here and put login button pressed. Run it. Okay, so our login button is connected. I confirm that we have login button pressed getting printed. Great. So let's write some more code here. We want to make sure that the two fields are not empty before we send it over to our function. So we'll use some guard statements and check for emptiness here. So we'll say guard let email equal to our email text field dot text. Next, we'll check to see if it's not empty here. We'll say email dot is not empty. Next, we'll say password equal to password text. Also check, make sure it's not empty. Password dot is not empty. Else return. We could have an alert here. We'll just put a print statement saying missing fields. And at this point, we have an email and a password here, which is not empty. So we'll go ahead and first figure out, we'll stop here, we'll write a function. I don't want to make that function too long. Keep your functions as short as possible. easier to test. So private function, continue login flow, and we'll call this here, continue login flow, email, and password. And here we'll simply call our continue login flow, pass an email and password. And in our continue login flow, we'll say if account state equal to existing, yes? Question?
Yeah, I'm not getting continue.
You're not getting continue login flow? We created it. This is our custom function. Hey, language. 7-year-olds are watching this.
I just don't. Excuse my language, y'all. I'm sorry.
So, if it's an existing user, oh, we need to get an off session going. Can I go up and we'll come right back? Let's go up together. Create the variable and come back. Right here, we'll create a variable called off session, which is an authentication session. What's that? As a what? You can make a singleton, but I prefer not to make a singleton here.
Why?
Because I might do delegates on it later, on the off session. Keep that open there. Okay, so we have our off session. Let's go down here. We have if account equals to this. Now you could continue typing here. Is this enough for us here? Can we see everything there to type? Okay. So if account is this, we'll use our off session. What is this? Existing, right? So existing account, pass in email, pass in password, and pass in our result type.
Also, here you just say result as opposed to off.
Yes, because it's the same as our API. It's like once you have a result that captures those 2 data points, it's just result is one data type. It has two states, success or failure. And if it's success, we'll get our data result. And if it's failure, we have an error.
On the other one, we didn't switch on the result. On this, we will switch on the result.
The other one, we also have that too. So off session for the other guy, we could just stub that out. It's create new user. Also email, password. Also has a result type. Cool? All right. So here we have our continue login flow. We'll switch on our result type. Case failure. Error. We have an error. Dispatch queue main dot async here. And case success at off data result. And one thing we want to do right here is, actually it's fine. You don't have to do anything here. So if we do have an error, we have an error label. Let's please update a weak self here. We have an error label. We'll just use it for both states. Self.errorLabel.text equal to error.localized description, and we'll make the text color red, system red. What's that? What's that? It's up in the private, in the outlets. We have one of those outlets there connected to our UI. What's your question, Yulia? Localized description gives us a localized description of the error. The error, it will be a full out error with the description of the error, but we just want that human readable part of that error, right? So the API will give that to us. What's the next step we have to do here? If it's success, our label is not gonna be red. We'll do error label.text color system green. We'll see what that looks like. And what is the text going to say? So we'll say label, error label.text equal to, what is this? This is an existing user. So welcome back, that's good, thank you. Welcome back, user with email. We could get an email. We get the email that they signed in with via the off data result. So we could simply say off data result dot user. The user object has a display name. If they have a display name, if they change it, we'll see how to change display names and all that stuff later. An email, the email they signed in with, phone number, URL, right? There's a lot of data that the user is associated with. So here we just simply use the email, and we'll use nil coalescing because it's an optional. There should be an email at this case.
Then nil coalescing will never be called, right?
Yeah, because technically there'll always be an email there.
Right,
Yeah. But by nature, it's an optional. Yeah. Okay, so cool. Because you could also sign in with a phone number as a part of Firebase too. Like there's phone number authentication. So in that case, they don't have an email, they have a phone number.
Like in the phone, like you can't always split the switch statement.
Yeah, exactly.
Standard authentication.
Okay, cool. So that gives us enough to go with for signing existing user. The sign existing user is very similar for the create new user. So with that, we could probably make that like a function. We could probably make this a function. We could clean that up a little bit, for sure. But let's just go ahead and type out. For now, just copy the dispatch for the error. And let's go ahead and do create new user. So create new user, same set of logic. We'll switch on our results. We'll say case failure, let error. Paste that in, and we'll say case success, let off data result. Our label color will stay green. We'll have our weak self. And for our description here, it's a new user. What are we saying here, Tiffany? Same up. We have our off data result dot user object dot email. Cool. Awesome. So we have enough code now to test our Firebase authentication.
Email, that sounds so robotic. User with email.
Oh, it's okay. I'm not a copy expert. Okay, how are we doing? We good? Can we test? All right, so what else we have going on there? Yeah, let's run the app. Scroll down. Oh, sorry. What part? What line? 75. Right here? Where we? Okay. Is it simulated anyway? So again, our big objective where we end today is can we create users on our Firebase console? Right?
Oh,
What happened?
oh, okay. All right. It's because we made it and then we put it in the button. Okay. That's what I was gonna say. I don't know if we call it. We don't have to call it.
Okay, cool. So let's go to create a new user, sign up here, put some email. Put some password. Click sign up. Our error works. That's good. It says the given sign-in provider is disabled for this Firebase project. Enable it in Firebase console. That's great. That's a great error, right?
Okay.
I see you don't agree.
I have the same error.
You agree it's a good error, right? It gives us information. It tells us what's going on. So what does it say? It says that now we need to go to, do we all get that error?
Yeah.
It's basically telling us now we need to go to our Firebase console and enable sign in with email. So let's go to our console. Let's go to our console. Click on authentication here in our left column, sorry. Click on authentication, yes? Do we see sign in method here?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Click on it.
No, I don't see that.
If I go back one, you clicked on authentication, yes? Brendan, do we see it?
Yes, we do.
Okay, Shania?
Yes.
Okay, click on sign up.
Where did you get that before?
Where did I get that before? Click on the blue button that says sign up, sign in method. And here we have many ways to sign up. Email password, this is what we're going to use. There's phone, there's Google, Play Games, Game Center, Facebook, Twitter, all of them, right? Keep in mind, if we ship in apps as of iOS 13 now, and we have a sign-in method like sign in with LinkedIn or sign in with Facebook, we have to add sign in with Apple. Okay? That's a requirement now. If you push in an app to the App Store and it has a sign in with X, it needs to have sign in with Apple. Okay?
It's like the face verification thing.
Not face verification, like whatever account the user has, they sign in with Apple, right? That's just a iOS 13 security enhancement now. where users are more comfortable with signing with Apple as opposed to signing with Facebook or whatever. So if your app does have one of those signing features, it needs to have signing with Apple associated with it. But for now, we're just doing sign in with email password. So click on email password and enable it. That's all we're doing. We're not doing email link here. Just click on where it says enable. Do we see enable here? Click on that and click on save. That's all we have to do. And now let's go back to our Xcode project and our simulator. Back in my simulator, let me see if I could just run this right away. Whoa, 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 whoa. I don't know. All right, at this point, if I say sign up here, the email is badly formatted, okay? That's a good error too. I need to have a dot something. Everybody with me? So Firebase is really good with errors. It gives you all those errors here. So let's go ahead and put in a .com, for example.
Wait, can I put in a real email address or I shouldn't?
For now, just put like a fake address. We're just testing here. Okay, so I have my password. I click on it. I get a next error. The password must be 6 characters long or more. Okay? So at this point, I'll create longer passwords. I'll click on sign up. And now I get a nice green message saying, hope you enjoy your app experience. And now if I go to my Firebase console, go to your Firebase console, do we see users here below authentication? Do we see users? Click on users. Cool. So that is the objective of the day, and we've come to our conclusion. Right? Oh, we need to test sign in existing user, and then we'll end. There's a forget password authentication. You can change it in the console. Oh, the sign in. Okay.
Log in, from sign up to log in.
Very good.
And it said welcome back to me at first.
Excellent. So let's test it here. Let me create a real account here. Not a real account, but whatever.
Well, if you press login, it keeps the data in the field, like in the text field.
Yep, exactly. That's the thing. That's how we had it. So da da da. Sign up. Oh, did I not put it? Okay, so that got created. Switch over. Let me verify. Refresh here.
So do
Right.
we have to keep, like, all right, so once you have a Google account, then you have your Firebase?
Yep.
So then you would just have to go to like Firebase?
Console.firebase.google and you're good.
Sign in?
Yeah.
With your regular Google account?
Exactly.
But you
It would be signed in, it'll be signed up already. Okay, so we're able to do that, and let's verify one more thing and we'll end it here.
The user ID, what can we do with the user ID? User ID.
Cool, welcome back. So welcome back user with email is there. So that's good, that works. Come next week, we'll take this app further. If I'm able to log in, then I'll be able to see the content of the app, whatever that content is. And then we'll start creating content on our database. Okay? So just a preview of what the database is. We need to click on our database console here. And we need to select what database we're dealing with. We need to click on Create Database. The default database is Firestore. How are we doing there? How are we doing? We fitting away? There's 2 databases in Firebase. There's a Firebase, there's a Cloud Firestore, and there's a real-time database. Real-time database is how Firebase started. That's the only database that was there, right? It was the real-time database. Now, there's a newer, faster database called Cloud Firestore. They're both still, real-time database is still supported, but Firebase Firestore is faster as far as like querying for objects indexing your database is just faster. It works better with Google Cloud and infrastructure. So that's what we'll be using. If you're looking at tutorials or whatever, newer tutorials, they'll be talking about Firebase Firestore or Cloud Firestore. Okay? So come Monday, we'll be creating a database. We'll be querying from the database. We'll be protecting our database with authentication. So only people that sign in with onto our app is able to create data, right? There's rules too that we could see. There's different rules. We'll keep rules configurations to a minimum, but you could really take rules fine-grained to only the person who creates something could delete something. There's like a lot of rules you could do. And as I said, the Firebase documentation is really good. So over the weekend, we could take a look at it. No break, right? Cameron is like laughing here. He's like, yeah. So over the weekend, we could take a look at the documentation. And those are the three things we hit it. Authentication, database, storage. Today we dealt with authentication. So I'll take a look at the authentication document. What else can I do with authentication? Forget user, right? Change email. There's a lot of things I could do still in authentication, right? There's a lot of things there. Change the fields for the user, but database is the heart of Firebase, what we're doing in there. So I'll really start previewing the database. And at the end of the day, Firebase works with like WebSockets. I was going to mention that real quickly. Firebase works with WebSockets. WebSockets basically, you have an open pipeline where data is coming in and out. I'm not making an HTTP request every time I want an update from my database. It just happens right away. There's no request. There's no handle change. WebSockets enable just like streaming of data. So for example, if I'm making a stocks app, then I'm making an HTTP request to find out, oh, what's the Dow right now, right? Down 4%, whatever it is. But that data needs to be as real time as possible. If it needs to be real time, it needs to be WebSockets, not HTTP. HTTP, you make a call, somebody else got to answer that call and give you a response. You want something else to happen? Make a call, that person has to give you a response. You see what I'm going with that? There's like a delay there, there's a lag, because request, response. In Firebase, there's no request response, it's just open. I update data, the change happens right away. Right? So that's WebSockets there. Okay? That's the backbone of Firebase, how it works and how the database real-time works, and Firestore as well. Cool? Any questions so far with anything else that we've done today? Okay? Cool? All right, so we'll end here.